that's going to leave a mark. What does that remind you of? Now, I said that in the voice of more Jim Carrey flair, but that was not really accurate because that was from another 90s movie called Tommy Boy, where he gets whacked over the side of the face with a 2x4 by David Spade. And he says, that's going to leave a mark. I share that because we're in these episodes that I've entitled The Four Roles Songs Play in Our Lives. And so stick around. We're going to talk about role number 2. Well, if you're checking this out for the first time, my name is Curtis, and I am a worship leader in the Kansas City area. I've been involved in worship and pastoral ministry for the last 20 plus years, and I kind of did this endeavor a couple years ago, and I've just not been super consistent with it, but had a lot of experiences and stories and principles that I wanted to share. And so I started my own podcast. And so I wanted to share some transformative content. And if you've stuck around, or if you've checked out any of my previous episodes, you already know this, but I want to share this. My role and the mission or the vision for why I've started this podcast, and why I've started a coaching business for worship leaders specifically, is because I want to create a thriving community where worshipers are raised up in 3 things: character, competence, and cognitive health. And so I had been reflecting recently on the significance and the weight of songs. Like, I've had several memories recently of instances in time where there was a specific song, and the weight and the meaning in which it carried for me in those times. And so I started being curious about that. And I was like, I think there's some aspects to pull from that. And I came up with 4 roles that songs play in our lives. And so last episode, we talked about role number 1 is how songs connect us. And just a short little recap, you could go back and watch that, is they connect us in 3 ways: to God. So it's a vertical connection to ourselves, or an emotional, so an inward connection, and then an outward connection to others. And so go back and watch that. We are now in the second role, and that is the fact of that songs mark us. I wanted to read a lyric from a song. It's beautifully written by a band called I Am They, and it's entitled Scars. And it says this, the chorus says this: "So I'm thankful for these scars, 'cause without them I wouldn't know your heart. And I know they'll always tell of who you are. So forever, I am thankful for these scars." I was trying to see if I have any significant scars that I could show you and be like, man, this points to just this huge memory in my life. Thankfully, I don't. But even if I did, you guys know what I'm talking about, those physical scars. And then I would even take it a layer, another layer, those inward scars that nobody can see. Maybe those inward marks on your heart and your soul. I feel like those are similar to the physical scar. They're etched on your spirit, your soul, your heart. And I think they're always there, and they always are there for a reason. They will remind you of what happened to create that wound or that scar. And if we could reframe a little bit and not view those as this big painful experience and a negative thing, without diminishing the significance of them, hear me, but to kind of reframe a little bit and see them as ways that it reminds us of the character of God. If we're a believer, if we call ourselves a Christ follower, and we've seen how he's shown up in our lives, then those can serve as a reminder that yes, something painful happened and it created this scar, but it gave an opportunity for the Spirit of God to be near us, to be with us through that. And so songs is just one of the many ways that God can be near us in that. There's a biblical tie-in that I wanted to start with, and that is found in 1 Samuel 7 verse 12. There's many biblical tie-ins, but this is the one I wanted to point out. And here's what it says. 1 Samuel 7 verse 12. It says, "Then Samuel took a stone and set it up between Mizpah and Shen and called its name Ebenezer. For he said, 'Till now the Lord has helped us.'" And so I wanted to kind of point back. You can go back in one of my previous episodes, and it was called. I had a two-parter, and it was called "Raising Ebenezers." And I won't share all that. I would like you to go watch that, and it kind of goes deeper and unpacks more of the significance of Ebenezers in our lives. But I wanted to pull one of those stories from that episode to reiterate this point here, is that songs mark us and they remind us of these Ebenezers in our lives and the significance of Ebenezers in our lives. I just wanted to give one example. And this isn't necessarily related around a song, but I'm just using this as an analogy of of how this plays out in our lives when the scripture refers to this stone of help. I remember it was on our 13th wedding anniversary weekend that my wife had a surprise for me, and we took a little trip around town. And she had set up these little decorative rocks in various portions of town, and they were at places that held significance in our lives. And so she would take me to, like, one of them was our first apartment that we rented right after we were married. That was one of the places she took me to, and she had gotten this stone and she had marked on it the message of something that was memorable in that season of time. And like, that was our beginning for the two of us. That was our first home, essentially, and so we took several trips around town, and each one had a stone with something written on it. And it was just like a really memorable way to solidify that we have moments in our lives where these Ebenezers, if you will, are being formed and being placed and being built. And they serve a purpose, because we may come into a specific instance in time where we need to reflect on that and call to mind that point in our life where this happened, right? And it was a clear indicator that the Lord was with us in that. And so songs is just a powerful avenue that solidifies that stone of help, if you will. And so that's the point. That's the biblical context of how songs mark us, and they cause us to remember a previous part in our life. Hey, thanks for sticking around and checking out this episode. I wanted to pause here for a second and let you know about this, what I feel is this awesome ministry that comes alongside churches and supports them in their need. InVia Collective, we're here to support the work of the local church because we believe every ministry matters. And we do this in one of two ways primarily. There's this arm of supporting churches through interim and ad hoc ministry partners. So there's a lot of churches that are looking for their next hire. And what we have found and what we know to be true is that Sunday's always coming. And so sometimes these churches, while they're looking for their next permanent hire, they're struggling Sunday in and Sunday out to fill those roles that a worship leader meets, right? But also there's this element of transition fatigue. When you're in this season of transition and you're not sure who's going to be the next fit, like, it can create this transition fatigue amongst the team. And so this is where this is one of the ways in which InVia comes alongside local churches, and we support them and we partner with them, and we provide these high caliber leaders that ministers to your team well and leads your team well while you're in the midst of looking for your long-term fit. Another way in which we partner with churches and provide support is through ministry consulting and coaching. And so these are ways that we can come alongside churches and we can hold workshops on specific areas of need within the church, whether that's AVL work and assessment, or tailored workshops for your worship team, your music team, or even just like with your pastoral staff of like coming alongside and reviewing the systems and processes that you use and provide some solutions solutions to even help you lead your church more effectively in that season. So we would love to have a conversation. You can find out more. I'm going to link in the show notes the website. You can find out more of who InVia Collective is, and we would love to partner with you in this way. But not only do songs mark us from this Ebenezer stone type way, in the biblical context of 1 Samuel 7:12, but another context in Scripture we see throughout many Scriptures, and I'm just going to highlight one. This is one of many, is they function as psalms of remembrance. And so Psalm 78, actually that's a chapter where the very end of that chapter, there's a verse, Psalm 78:72, where it says God takes David from shepherding his sheep to leading his people, and he does that with integrity of heart, skillful hand. That verse has been very transformative in my life over the last several years. But if you look at the whole chapter, the chapter walks through and it kind of recounts Israel's journey. And I wanted to point out a couple things here, because in context of a biblical basis, right, and a biblical tie-in, we're talking about Psalms of remembrance. There's a couple ways that this plays out. One is we can look back and we can recount the ways in which we chose our own way, if we're being honest. And I think that's important because it's not always a bed of roses. It's not always remembering how the Lord has come through. But I think it's important for us to recount the ways and recall the ways in which we chose our own way, because we can go back and we can see, hey, this is where I chose to do things my way, and see how that that worked out for me. But then the flip side of that is also recounting the ways in which God has shown up and been faithful in our lives. Here I raise my Ebenezer, right? That's these psalms of remembrance, these Ebenezers in our life, but also these psalms of remembrance. And another two ways that I want to point out is through trauma and transformation. Okay, so through trauma, there's songs that are tied to pain, loss, and dark seasons. And as I think I shared in the last episode, there's just an outlet and a way that songs and the creative outlet and writing of songs can speak what our hearts can't really put to words, if that makes sense. And that's the beauty and the power of music being tied with the message, right? But there's these songs that have been written throughout time that convey these very deep and dark points of trauma. And that was one of the only ways the artist, and maybe you've written one of these, that was the only way in which the artist could find some sense of relief and some sense of an outlet to process this deep pain and this deep trauma. But then there's also songs that point to transformation. You know, these are songs that are tied to healing, calling, surrender, and revival. And those are equally important. Songs that remind us of, okay, here's something that marked me, but it was in a transformative way. And I can recall that. I can bring that up in my hard drive, if you will, and remember that. And maybe it's just as simple as when a song is played on the radio or through your Spotify or whatever, and it reminds you of the point you first heard that, or you first witnessed that song, right? And it was tied to this aspect of transformation, this aspect of healing. So just a reminder, like, I'm going to focus these first 4 episodes on taking role by role of how psalms or songs play that role in our lives. And then there's going to be a separate episode, or maybe a couple, depending on how long it gets, where I'm going to just share song after song after song of these pivotal moments in our lives. But the key point that I want to leave you with today, some songs don't just remind us of moments, but rather they preserve us. And that's the beauty of songs and the role in which it plays and how they mark us and how they preserve us. And so stick around for the next episode where we will talk about role number 3 of the roles that songs have in our lives.